Never thought I'd see this.
Me neither.
Let's get out of here.
Alright, what's up guys? Hope y'all are having a great day today, just full of so much positivity and happiness, dude. Because that's exactly what this review is not going to be filled with.
This is where the fun begins.
Star Wars Outlaws is the perfect example of a Ubisoft game. You have a great premise or great source material, but you still find a way to produce mediocre slop at every single opportunity. Now, that's not to say that Star Wars Outlaws is a bad game by any stretch of the imagination. It's just incredibly mediocre in just about every single way you can imagine, from the story to the gameplay to the characters to the graphics. Everything about this game just feels like the same old recycled Ubislop we've seen 100 times before, just with a brand new Star Wars coat of paint onto it. There truly is nothing about this game that even feels like Star Wars either. This quite literally, I believe, is that game they announced a long time ago that they were trying to like crowdsource the coding and development for, Beyond Good and Evil 2. I think what happened here is they started development on that, and then someone at Ubisoft got the idea to say, hey, let's buy the Star Wars license now that EA no longer has exclusivity to it, and let's reskin our Beyond Good and Evil 2 game that we have in development thus far and call it Star Wars Outlaws. And if that was the case, I would find that completely believable, because nothing about this game feels like Star Wars. It just feels like another generic Ubisoft open world action adventure pseudo stealth game that just so happens to take place in the Star Wars universe because you encounter stormtroopers as one of the various enemy types you see throughout the game. So really, that's the only connection to Star Wars. I mean, Ubisoft was so lazy in trying to replicate that Star Wars feel that they didn't even go like the bare minimum. There's one scene in the game where you enter the Tatooine Cantina, one of the most famous scenes from Star Wars, and if you've seen the movies, you know there's a very important aspect about the cantina, and that's the cantina music. And Ubisoft couldn't have even been bothered to license the cantina music to put in this game.
Who's a loser now?
The legendary us, as always. Now pay up.
Don't have it. Easy.
Is that yours?
It's dressed up. Want bread? No.
What the hell are you doing?
It's yours.
Ow! Let go of me! Yes!
And it's small little things like that that are just everywhere that pulls you out of the experience and makes it feel like you're playing something more like Starfield than actual Star Wars. And that to me is definitely not a good thing. But let's go ahead and get into this review, and we'll talk about something that has been plaguing Ubisoft games for a very, very long time. And that is bugs, glitches, and overall technical problems that plague this particular game. Now, originally my plan to play Star Wars Outlaws was I was going to buy a physical copy of the game, and I was just going to stream it when it came out, but someone informed me that it was going to be launching in Ubisoft Plus, so that was only 17 or 18 bucks for the month, and I could play it day one when the game released in 3-day early access, so I decided to opt for that option. Now, the whole process of setting up Ubisoft Plus was an absolute nightmare that I'm not going to get into. Linking a Microsoft account and your Ubisoft account is one of the worst technology experiences I've had in a very long time. If you've ever dealt with Microsoft accounts, you know they are an absolute fucking bitch to deal with, but eventually I got it linked. I had to download the game from my phone to my console because Microsoft did not have the option to preload the game on console if you had Ubisoft Plus, but the mobile version of the store on the Xbox app did for whatever reason. Very odd, but I downloaded the game. Midnight came around where it said that it was launching into Ubisoft Plus on the 27th. They even put out a chart showing you what time the game released, so I know this for a fact. It would not start. I couldn't start the game for like 30 minutes post-launch, so I decided to go against my better judgment and download the Ubisoft launcher on my PC. I downloaded the game and started playing, and within the first 5 to 10 minutes, I experienced 2 hard crashes 3 minutes apart from each other. I have no idea what the fuck is happening, bro. What the fuck? So even on fucking PlayStation, this crashes. Wow. Typically, I avoid Ubisoft games on PC like the plague because they are always buggy, broken, and borderline unplayable at launch on the PC version for the most part, so I typically will stick to console if I'm playing an early build version of the game. So at this point, I'm kind of at a loss, so I decided to just bite the bullet. I bought the game on PS5, and not just the normal version, I got the early access version for $130, man. So all in, I have spent about $150 on this absolute piece of shit game. So yeah, just know that going in, this was a process, but overall, the game itself is not completely broken, at least on console. That being despite the fact that if you played the PS5 version, Ubisoft actually put out an advisory telling people to delete their save file from the game if they started playing it at midnight because they forgot to send out a day 1 patch on time or something like that. And basically what would happen if you kept playing with that save file, it would lock you out of certain main missions in the game, causing you to be unable to progress through the main storyline. So yeah, the entire launch process and just being able to get into this game was an absolute nightmare from the very beginning when it comes to even just preloading the game and linking my account to Ubisoft Plus. So yeah, this was an absolute process, man, and it definitely was not worth it. But that is only where the issues begin, because there are a ton of bugs and glitches in this game throughout, and just overall Ubisoft jank that is, you know, par for the course for any game that they put out in the modern gaming landscape. So one of the biggest issues that I ran into is just overall the visuals take a shit on themselves. And, you know, a prime example of this, I tried to record a few of these just to have examples. I had countless others that I didn't bother recording because there's no point in making a 50-minute montage of all the issues you encounter in a Ubisoft game, but one of the biggest ones was the lighting just absolutely freaking out for no reason, and here's a pretty good example of that. There's also a ton of pop-in, and it's not just in the environments, it's on character models, it's in the menus, it's in the map, like everything has insane pop-in in this game. And one of the worst examples that I got was during one of the main story cutscenes towards the end of the game, and everyone's favorite female protagonist from the game was looking a little more rough than usual.
I've lost control. Why have I lost control?
You'll also have instances during the cutscenes where, you know, items will just randomly disappear as well. You also have other aspects where, like, you're traversing the environment and randomly your character will auto-clamber over a railing, hurling you to your death. And as much as I appreciate what should have been the canon ending to this game, it does get very annoying and happened to me on several different occasions while playing the game. My hand was nowhere near the jump button, and somehow I still managed to hurl myself over a railing to my death in the midst of combat, making me restart the entire encounter. Now, there's other jank when it comes to traversing the environment. This game relies heavily on parkour and platforming mechanics, and sometimes the platforming mechanics just will not work at times, and you won't get the prompt that you need in order to execute the action you're trying to do, even though it's blatantly obvious that's what you're supposed to do. So you'll have to backtrack, come back, and in some cases reload your last save entirely because the game just will not allow you to exit or move on from where you are currently. A perfect example of this is during combat, I fell into a vent that you're supposed to be able to sneak through and climb in and out of in order to avoid detection. And well, once I get in, I was having a lot of trouble getting out.
Oh my god, stop, bro, I'm stuck. Can you help me?
And there are numerous instances like that, especially with the rope swinging mechanic where the input will just basically drop, or even though you're spamming the prompt, the action you're trying to execute just does not actually materialize. So there is the typical Ubisoft traversal jank in abundance here. But you can clearly see the prompt turned green when I pressed X as instructed, and yet that still did not work. So there's a lot of moments like that that are just irritating. Luckily, it doesn't take you too far back if that happens, but it's still a moderate annoyance to say the least. And going back to the ropes, there was another example that I just remembered now that I have a clip of where you're lowering yourself down, and let's just say your character goes a little further down than originally planned.
Hey, how are you doing? Everything all right?
A little busy right now.
You heard her.
In addition to this, there are some puzzle elements of the game that will glitch out as well. A prime example, and by far the worst example I encountered, was basically you have to destroy these little, I guess, capacitors or whatever that, you know, either power up or block off areas of the map. And, well, you're supposed to shoot these, they explode, and let's just say a little bit more happened than usually anticipated.
That base. We need the element of surprise. Typhoon Squadron out.
Typhoon Squad. You gotta be kidding me. Ooh.
And then there are some glitches, or I don't even know if you'd really call them glitches, but they're more funny than anything, so I don't really want to hold it against it, but you will encounter various instances like this, which are more funny than anything, to its credit.
More of those bandits? Oh, come on! I don't have anything! Just leave me alone!
You won't live through this.
And I think as far as the worst technical issue, like all things considered, I ran into, was me literally unable to complete a quest objective because whatever the objective was did not actually load into the area that I was exploring. So I went through all the motions, got access to like the control room, and right where the objective was supposed to be, there was absolutely nothing for me to interact with. So there were definitely some broken missions in this game, and that was mildly irritating to say the least, because you go through this like 30-minute process of infiltrating an Imperial base, and then when you finally get to the access point or whatever it is you're supposed to be interacting with for that particular quest, there's absolutely nothing to interact with, and you have to exit the area and hope that eventually you're going to actually be able to complete that objective. But I think that covers primarily all the issues I ran into. Again, these are just one or two examples of the various things I encountered. I did not record everything. This game does have a lot of issues and definitely could have used some more polish, that's for sure, but I think Ubisoft wanted to push this out as far ahead of Assassin's Creed Shadows as they could, because they probably knew that if they released these two games too close together, people would buy one and not the other, so they didn't want to cannibalize sales. But yeah, the typical Ubisoft jank and technical issues are well on display here, so that is definitely something to keep in mind, and probably should tell you not to rush out and go buy this game as soon as possible, even if you are interested, because there is a lot of work to be done in getting this game into what I would consider to be a launchable state. So anyway, let's go ahead and move on to our next category here, and that of course is what should be the most important part of a game, and that is the gameplay. Now, when it comes to the gameplay of Star Wars Outlaws, this is a mixed bag for me. There are certain aspects that I did really like, and there are aspects that I really did not like. So let's go ahead and start off with the positives here, because there are a few to get through. So first off, the space combat. I actually thought the space combat was very well done in Star Wars Outlaws. As someone who put a lot of time into Starfighter Assault on EA's Battlefront 2, this was very good. I think it felt very intuitive. The controls weren't overly complicated. Some games cannot get flight controls right, and luckily in this case they did a very good job of it. Everything feels intuitive, it's very easy to learn, and I had a lot of fun during the space combat sequences. I thought for the most part they were very genuinely enjoyable. I almost wish there was more of it, and it would have been more of a focus of the game, especially in terms of the main storyline. Also, I really liked the fact that there was no level-based combat, so there wasn't really an unnecessary grind that you had to go through if you wanted to progress the story. Now, I will add a caveat that there are segments in the game where basically they change the requirements for stealth without telling you whatsoever. So if you have not been doing side activities and have not been unlocking like the new gear and upgraded items and things like that, you'll kind of get railroaded in a sense, because it completely forces you to change the way that you've been playing up until that point, especially when you get to Tatooine and Jabba's palace. There starts to become enemies that you can no longer one-hit stealth takedown. Which this happens in a part of the game where you cannot exit the main storyline, so it's not even like you can go do those quests and get that material and then come back and try and tackle the mission later on. You're like stuck there. And to make it even worse, it's the part of the story where you lose your little companion monster thing that helps you during stealth. So you basically get double penetrated at once, man, and it's not a very fun experience in my opinion. But aside from that one instance, I never really felt like side activities or grinding or doing anything other than the main storyline was necessary, so I do want to give Ubisoft credit for that, because that is definitely a departure from their more recent games. Now, another thing I did actually like in this game is I felt like the side activities were varied enough. Like, obviously, you have your typical Ubisoft, go to this side of the map, pick up this item, and come back, collectathon style activities, but I felt like a lot of the side activities did have some good variety and did have like their own unique storylines and weren't just super surface level, so I did want to give credit for that. Now, trust me, the typical copy-paste Ubisoft activities are there and present, and the main story is definitely guilty of that as well, but overall, I did think there was a decent variety of side activities compared to other Ubisoft games, and they did try to push like this weird blackjack, poker kind of rip-off game called Sabak that was absolutely miserable as fuck to play because you couldn't organically play it. Like, I tried to beat one person for over what felt like an hour at one point, and basically it came down to the fact that I hadn't unlocked enough cheats in order to cheat my way through the match to win, because basically the game ensures that the NPCs win over and over and over again, and they do that in order to force you to go and do the side activities, to go and unlock the cheats to give yourself an unfair advantage against the people who already have an unfair advantage. So that aspect I didn't really like, and whenever that came up in like a mission. Like you get halfway through a side mission and then all of a sudden it's telling you to go play sabacc or whatever. It's like, hell fucking no. So I mean, I guess if you enjoy card games and your video games, then there's that aspect for it. I didn't explore it very much because I did not care for it. But aside from that, I thought the side activities were pretty decent in this game that I experienced personally, at least the ones that I could complete. Now, moving on from that, I did want to mention the stealth abilities that are provided by your little companion character, Nyx, which is the little monster that hangs onto your back. And I thought the way they implemented him into stealth was very cool. Like, he can go and turn off alarms, he can distract guards, he can attack an enemy while you take down the other one, preventing them from noticing you fully and sounding the alarm. So I like the implementation that they did with him, in particular when it comes to the stealth combat, because I thought that was actually a pretty unique take that kind of differentiates it from the typical pseudo-stealth Ubisoft action-adventure experience. So I did like that a lot. The one part I didn't like is how you'd have to get to like an arbitrary angle in order to have him interact with some aspect of the environment for like some light platforming puzzle solving. So that's like the one part I didn't like, but overall I really did like the implementation of Nyx in the stealth combat. And also another highlight for me was definitely the faction system. While this wasn't as fully fleshed out as I would have wanted, I did think it was cool how in the various cities and hub areas, each faction would have like their own little region, and depending on your standing with that faction, you would either be able to walk right in or you'd have to sneak in. You would get special discounts with merchants and store vendors within those particular zones. You get exclusive items and rewards and quests based on your standing. I really did like that. I think that was actually well done, and I wish they would have utilized it a lot more in the main storyline, because your faction standing has absolutely no effect on the events of the main story whatsoever. You could be completely hated by a faction, and then at the end of a story mission, they're thanking you like you're literally their messiah. So it's really weird. I think they should have actually like implemented the faction system more into the main storyline and added some, I guess, variability to how story events play out, but they did not whatsoever, which I think is definitely a missed opportunity. But I mean, it's Ubisoft. That's kind of the name of the game when it comes to them, but I think what was there was cool enough to actually add like some incentive to try and actually improve your standing with some of these factions, depending on what things you're looking to get, what quests you're looking to complete, and overall what parts of the cities you're trying to access as well. Like, it could actually save you a lot of time to do a bunch of little bullshit missions for a faction just so you don't have to sneak in to that one particular zone over and over and over again, and then makes future quests for other factions even easier. So I did like that aspect a lot. I just wish it would have had more impact in the overall way that the game's story unfolded, because I think that would have been actually a pretty cool way to, you know, just add on to the experience a little bit more, but unfortunately they did not do that. So now that we got the positives out of the way, guys, let's go ahead and get into the negatives. Alright, so first and foremost, this is a stealth game, and for me, I am not a fan of stealth games. The way the marketing material for this game is they make it look like this super fast-paced action third-person shooter with like some light stealth elements. I would say about 75% of the time you're going to spend in this game is spent sneaking around some form of Imperial base or gang hideout or something like that. Like, it is a very, very heavy stealth-based game with a ton of auto-fail mechanics that if you get detected, the mission fails and you have to restart from a checkpoint. Now, luckily, they are pretty generous with the checkpoints, and there are a lot of measures you can use to prevent yourself from getting detected and the enemies like alerting the rest of the base by sounding the alarm. So there are some nice ways to avoid that happening, but if you're not a fan of stealth games or stealth mechanics or forced stealth in video games or auto-fail stealth mechanics, you're probably not going to want to play this, because that's what you're going to be doing for about 75% of the time, and a lot of these sequences are just way too drawn out and long, man. Like, it'd be okay if you had like a 5-minute stealth segment within like 20 minutes of like action or exploration, but it can be like 45 minutes straight of uninterrupted stealth. Now, luckily, this is Ubisoft stealth that we're talking about. So it is pretty forgiving, but at the same time, man, it just gets old after a while. Every single mission feels the exact same. There's very little variety whatsoever when it comes to the main story missions or side missions whatsoever. It basically involves sneaking into a base undetected, finding an item, and then having to shoot your way out, and then maybe sneak out at the very end. So it's very repetitive. It feels very, very similar from start to finish, and the gameplay never really evolves in any significant manner whatsoever. So if you're not a fan of stealth games, you're not going to enjoy this, and even if you are a fan of stealth games, there's not really a lot of variety here. It's basically the exact same type of stealth from start to finish that involves you sneaking around, disabling alarms, hacking terminals, hacking doors, and taking down enemies with your one-hit punch, because somehow a 90-pound woman can punch a stormtrooper in the head and knock them out immediately. Now, during the moments you are not in stealth, the enemies are insane bullet sponges. It will take 5 to 7 shots in most cases from your blaster in order to kill a singular stormtrooper, and that is not to mention the extremely tanky enemies that you run into later in the game, which will maybe take you about 20 to 30 shots to put down. So it is excessively spongy, especially considering the fact that you're using a fucking blaster, but it's often more effective to just run up and punch enemies, because not only does it only take 3 punches to put most enemies down in this game, there's also gear that you get about halfway through the game that when you punch an enemy, it restores a bar of your health, which basically makes you completely invincible in a lot of these segments, as demonstrated by this clip, where I guess I ran into an infinite enemy spawner and I was just literally standing there for several minutes, punching the stormtroopers over and over again and not taking a bit of damage whatsoever. You know, absolutely wonderful, man. And I had actually almost fully upgraded my blaster at that point in the game too, so very interesting. But aside from that, you have just like the typical Ubisoft jank, which we kind of mentioned earlier, where, you know, your prompts just sometimes will not register. Traversal becomes a pain in the ass. You'll have to constantly redo platforming sections because you'll try to swing over a gap using your rope and you'll spam R3 even though you see the prompt, but it won't activate. Like, there's a lot of typical Ubisoft jank in this game, so I don't really feel like we need to like hyperfixate on that again, but it is definitely worth re-mentioning in this particular segment. Go back to the first part if you just skipped the gameplay. Then also, there's no weapon variety. Like, there are some weapons you can pick up off the ground, but you can't like stash them or carry them with you. In fact, if you climb up anything, if you open up anything, or do literally anything, the weapon drops from your hands. So really, you're just with your blaster. Now, it does have 3 different modes and 3 fire modes for each of the modes, but none of them really feel different enough to make any sort of significant impact. In fact, you'll find yourself really just relying on the same 3 for the entire game that you get used to early on, because they all essentially do the exact same thing. Like, 2 of them have like actual functions when it comes to like puzzle solving, and the main fire mode is just for dealing damage. I never really felt a reason to use any other modes other than the starting mode for each, but I guess they're there if you want. But overall, the weapon variety in this game is lacking, to say the least. I think the platforming in this game, like I mentioned, is very jank, and there's just a little bit too much of it. Like, there's way too many sections of the game where you're just climbing up and down walls, jumping from railing to railing. Like, it's the worst parts of an Uncharted game on steroids. Like, this is basically Uncharted without all the fun action combat. Instead, it's just overly reliant on stealth. Now, you will get a speeder bike later in the game, and this thing handles horribly, man. Like, this has to be some of the worst driving mechanics slash just feel of a vehicle I've seen in a video game in quite some time. Like, it quite literally feels like the thing is glued to the floor when you try and turn. There's no turning radius. It's bad. I hate using the speeder. Also, there's a really annoying part about using the speeder where when you stop moving, you have to be like perfectly still in order to get off of it. But even after you completely stop, there's like this 3 to 5 second period where you're not able to get off your speeder. But there's a mechanic in this game that if you've pissed off a certain faction enough, they will send bounty hunters after you to try and kill you. Well, the problem is they come after you during the speeder bike segments, so they can shoot at you from their speeders. You can't shoot back, so you have to stop, get off your speeder, and in a lot of cases, by the time you're finally able to get off the fucking thing, you've already lost half of your health and you're probably gonna die because most likely there's not cover around you in order to protect you from the enemies that have already been shooting at you for like 20 seconds at that point.
What if that droid was another hunter fighting over my bounty? Is it that stolen ship? That veiled person almost had us. We need to get rid of this death mark fast.
Also, I'm not an expert in Star Wars astrophysics or anything like that, but explain to me how a speeder takes fall damage. Like, doesn't that fucking thing float above the ground? But anyway, yeah, the speeder's absolutely horrible. They should have definitely done a better job with that. But speaking of fall damage is so unforgiving in this game that it's actually ridiculous. Heights that clearly would not kill you will absolutely decimate your health bar.
Whoa. I think we're...
Now, going back to a point I actually made previously, you don't really ever feel like you're actually making any sort of progress. Like, the whole point of this game is basically to build a squad to go and basically conduct a heist, which we'll get into the whole logistics of that when we get to the stories section, because holy fuck, the story's bad. But at no point in this game do you ever feel more powerful. You basically feel the exact same from start to finish. Like, sure, you get some additional tools, but they're usually more like circumstantial. They're not really a general ability or tool that helps you in combat scenarios. So any sense of progression you get is linked to arbitrary traversal blockers and basically getting those tools in order to be able to access areas that you previously weren't able to, which I don't really think feels good. Now, granted, I do like the fact that you do not have to grind or get a bunch of new equipment in order to tackle the events of this game, but at the same time, I do wish that as you played it, you felt more well-equipped to take on whatever it was the game was throwing at you, but instead, the enemies get tougher and you stay at the exact same point. So it almost feels like you're working backwards in a sense to where you should feel more powerful and more ready to handle these type of scenarios. But that's definitely something I liked and didn't like. So again, something that kind of plays into a positive and negative in that sense. I think it really plays to the detriment of the game, especially considering that I think the biggest negative people are going to have surrounding the gameplay is just how repetitive it feels from start to finish. But speaking of repetitive, let's talk about the puzzles in this game. Now, pretty much every 2 to 3 minutes you're doing some sort of hacking minigame. The first one is basically the equivalent of Wordle, where you have to pick like these 4 to 5 random symbols and try to align them in the proper order. I mean, it's literally Wordle. If you're familiar with that, it's basically that, but with Star Wars symbols. And then there's another variation which is used for lock picking, which is basically matching the rhythm of a blinking light. So you have to match the rhythm of the inputs to the way a light blinks on the lock, and that's how you open up doors, access chests, and then the splicing minigame, which is basically the Wordle thing I mentioned, is how you access terminals, turn off security cameras, and things like that. So it's the exact same puzzle from start to finish. It does not change whatsoever. You will probably do hundreds of each one by the time you're finished with the game, and it gives gets very, very repetitive. It's a problem that another game had called Atomic Heart, where you're just doing a puzzle every other room and it's the same repetitive shit over and over again. So I would say it's worse in this game because there's multiple puzzles in each room for the most part. But yeah, again, it really just doesn't help that nothing changes from start to finish when you first start playing this game all the way up to the end. In fact, speaking of the puzzles, the final boss of this game is one of the worst I have seen in terms of gimmick boss fights, I think, in modern gaming history. Essentially what it is you're fighting against your robot companion, and instead of actually fighting him, you have to sneak around the room and solve 3 of these puzzles on 2 separate occasions in order to turn on like these electric conduits. It is absolutely miserable, and it's just another slap in the face at the very end of the game, essentially. And bro, I don't know. I just, this game is just absolutely fucking horrible when it comes to the repetitive bullshit. But this boss fight, I think, took the cake, bro. Like, I have never seen something so blatantly lazy and just stupid in quite some time. But yeah, the final boss fight consists of you solving 3 puzzles in a room while moving around trying to remain undetected 2 times in order to turn on the electricity. Like, that's the massive payoff you get at the end of the game. It's just, it's an absolute joke, man. And then there's also another boss fight too, where basically you're up against a Rancor and you have to shoot these explosive barrels in order to piss him off so that he charges the metal door and allows you to get out. So yeah, both of the gimmick boss fights in this game are an absolute joke, and they're absolutely horribly done. Now, staying on the theme of repetitive shit, let's talk about the repetitive sequence of events for each of the planets. Now, there's 4 main planets in this game, and each one follows a very similar route. You arrive at the planet, you have to track down your new team member you're trying to recruit for the heist. That person is involved in some trouble on the planet. You have to go help whatever local faction it is, which eventually leads to you infiltrating an Imperial base to steal some sort of item. You then exit that Imperial base, which leads up to like the set piece, I guess, mission at the end of each planet that inevitably leads to the person you went to the planet for joining your team and getting ready for the heist. Now, you do this on 4 separate occasions. Luckily, some of the planets are shorter than others, like the Tatooine one is definitely the shortest, but some of the other ones are absolutely miserably long because a lot of them are padded out by like 10 to 15 minute speeder bike rides across these massive empty open worlds that are just there for the sake of padding. So you're gonna have to ride back and forth because they restrict fast travel during a lot of these sequences. So you're spending a ton of time driving back and forth across this desolate wasteland in most cases, and it's just not fun. Like, it feels like you've done the exact same thing 4 times because you literally have. It's just the location and the characters have changed in that particular instance. So that really doesn't help either when the main story missions start to feel like the exact same thing over and over again. And I shit you not, it's literally arrive to the planet, help out the local faction, infiltrate an Imperial base, you know, help the faction with like their final end goal, recruit the character, move on. Now, towards the end of the game, we get a little bit of variety, but holy shit, I'm gonna save that for the story because it's one of the worst plot twists I think I've seen in a modern video game in quite some time, and honestly gives Disney Star Wars a good look when it comes to the writing department. But like I mentioned earlier, just these unnecessarily large open world areas, like, I don't know why Ubisoft just can't drop this shit, man. Get rid of the unnecessary open worlds. Make a fucking linear game for once in your life. Not every game needs to have empty exploration areas that solely exist to pad out the runtime and force the player to traverse these massive expanses for no other reason other than to say your game is X number of hours longer than it actually is. So that was absolutely irritating and something I definitely did not like about the gameplay experience, especially considering how much I hated that fucking speeder in the first place. But I think that wraps up everything I want to say about the gameplay, so I think we should probably go ahead and move on to my favorite part of this game 100%, and that is the story. when it comes to the story of Star Wars Outlaws, it is quite literally what you would expect when it comes to a Star Wars story told for a modern gaming audience.
For a modern gaming audience.
And this story is just about on par with some of the worst Disney Star Wars storylines that we see in today's wonderful Star Wars universe, sponsored by the House of Mouse. But yeah, I mean, overall, the entire plot of this game basically surrounds Kay, who's the main character, tries to break into like this, I guess, cartel leader or gang leader named Sliro's mansion to steal some money. In the first attempt, she gets caught and mistaken for being a rebel. So the guy who she's stealing from puts a death mark on her head for 400,000 credits. And essentially, the entire game revolves around you gathering a crew in order to go steal the money from the guy that put the death mark on your head in order to pay off the death mark. Like, it really makes no sense, and it gets even more nonsensical from there on out. So essentially, you travel to 4 different planets to recruit 4 different crew members towards this aim, and you know, stuff happens along the way. You help out the rebels, you help out the local factions, but the entire plot primarily revolves around you collecting these team members in order to go and steal from Sliro's vault once again, which again makes no sense considering he's the one who put a bounty on your head for $400,000. So if you get the money from stealing from him again, what would stop him from just putting another bounty on your head immediately after? Like, the entire thing is just absolutely stupid. And from there on out, it just further spirals once you get past the initial heist plot line. So fast forward through all the 4 planets, all the people you have to recruit. Like, you need your demolition expert, you know, the mechanic, the hacker, blah, blah, blah. She meets her mom and reconnects with her along the way. You run into Darth Vader, dude, because, you know, that's so lay epic, but it just never gets good. So, like, after you escape initially from the first failed heist attempt and the guy puts the death mark on your head, you steal his ship, leave the planet, and then you encounter this guy named Waka who ends up betraying you along the way. Then you meet this guy named Jalen who gives you his robot ND5 to basically make sure you do what you're supposed to because he wants to be a part of the heist, which will become clear why later on in the game. And remember that robot, because the robot is actually the central theme of the story, believe it or not, as you soon find out in the last 2 missions of the game. But yeah, you then pick up the demolitions expert, the hacker, which is your mom after the other one, you know, dies and everything like that. But yeah, it's a massive slog. You're doing the same thing on each planet in the process of recruiting. So fast forward to the heist, you go through all the motions, you utilize all the people that you recruited, you get inside the vault, you steal the thing inside, and you're presented with a moment where basically Sliro confronts you on your way out when you're leaving, and the game makes it a point to not have you kill him, because apparently the entire point of this game is to pay off a death mark that was put on your head by Sliro. But instead of just taking out Sliro so he can't put another one on your head, which at this point you find out he's like some sort of imperial informant, so you know he not only has like the underworld at his disposal, but also the entire motherfucking empire. Yeah, instead of just taking that guy out, you know, you knock him out and just leave.
Anything you're waiting for?
No. I've decided.
Is this a joke?
Hilarious, isn't it? 20%. 10.
I'll take everything you have.
It's yours. 15. Done.
Your lives are over. Your family, friends, gone. There's nowhere in the galaxy you can hide from the ISB.
Last thing I need is a dead ISB director. But I can get there.
It's just completely idiotic, but yeah, you escape, you get back on your ship, and you open up the box and find out that you weren't actually stealing money after all. You were stealing Sliro's blackmail files that he had collected on the Empire. And basically, the guy Jalen, who owns ND5, the robot, wanted to use that information to bargain with Darth Vader to take his brother Sliro's place as the head of the underworld faction and as an asset for the Empire. Wow, dude, what an awesome plot twist. Now, you might be wondering, what the fuck does the robot have to do with any of that shit? Well, it turns out that Kay has zero problem with, you know, Sliro's brother Jalen betraying him and then taking that information to the Empire itself. The problem she has is that his robot doesn't have free will. I shit you not.
Okay, Andy. Here I am. You win. I won't fight anymore. But I know this isn't you, Jalen.
So now the entire heist plot line goes out the fucking window, and you become a freedom fighter to fight for ND5's human rights, bro, and free him from Jalen's control programming so that he can live as a sentient being and make decisions for himself. So this has you head to a nearby Star Destroyer to go and confront Jalen and use this device that one of your crew members gives you to free ND5 from his control programming so that you can have your crew all together at once, man. Like, it is so fucking cringe. So basically, you have to sneak onto the Star Destroyer, and for the first time in the entire storyline of the game, you're actually able to put on Stormtrooper armor and sneak inside, which saves you a metric fuckload of time getting through it, and it makes you wonder, why the fuck couldn't you have just done this throughout the entirety of the base game? But anyway, that's beside the point. So you infiltrate the Star Destroyer, you eventually confront Jalen, and you see him betray his brother and shoot him in the chest and take his place as like head of the ISB as well as his underground organization, and he refuses to hand over ND5, which starts this entire chain of events where ND5 chases you through the Star Destroyer, and you essentially have to turn on 2 power conduits, I think is what they were called. I don't exactly remember, but basically the idea is to turn on this electricity so that it shocks ND5 long enough for you to put this device in his chest to break Jalen's control over him so that he can become free to make his own choices. What a truly noble cause, man. But anyway, you go through probably one of the worst gimmick boss fights that I've seen in quite some time, and after you turn on the electricity, it stuns ND5, but right before you're able to put the thing into his chest, you're stopped. And who comes down personally holding a hostage? Sliro. He's holding a gun to the rebel member of your crew's head, because even though he's in charge of an entire Star Destroyer now, he chooses to single-handedly confront Kay with a gun pointed to the guy's head with no Stormtrooper backup of any sort whatsoever. I mean, at this point in the game, I literally had to pause it because of just how fucking ridiculous this shit was.
Kay!
And I was literally dying laughing. But, you know, through the power of friendship, ND5 breaks his control and, you know, turns on Jalen, killing him. And then they escape from the Star Destroyer, but find out that it's already en route using the information provided by Jalen to the rebel hideout. So what do? You hop in your ship and you gotta destroy the Star Destroyer. So you take out the Star Destroyer and then fly off into the sunset. And that's basically the end of the game. It is an absolute fucking joke of a story. It is horrible. It's one of the worst heist storylines I've seen probably in gaming that I've ever played through personally, and overall, it is a complete and total joke. You can tell they threw this shit together in probably the span of a few months, and you could definitely tell that a woman wrote this shit, because not only is the dialogue insufferably cringe, but almost every single major character without fail is a boss bitch. In fact, about 70% of the stormtroopers you'll encounter are women, because that's definitely something that was extremely prominent in all of the Star Wars movies, is female stormtroopers. But yeah, you could just tell this is woke as shit. Like, all the characters are super diverse. The only white men are actual villains, so it's very blatantly obvious. It has all the woke elements that you expect for a modern Ubisoft game, with lots and lots of fucking boss bitches everywhere, and I still find it comical that Kay, a 90-pound girl, is knocking out stormtroopers with a single punch to their helmet instead of using like a taser that at least Mary Jane from Spider-Mid 2 had that made it a little bit more believable. But nah, dude, Kay can just go and one-hit punch these fuckers and knock them clean out with the power of her bare fist instead of using a knife or a device or something to incapacitate them. I mean, this game is a complete and total joke from a narrative perspective, and it's perfectly in line with the new standard of excellence we can expect from the House of Mouse and their handling of Star Wars. So, you know, really bravo to Ubisoft on this one for somehow outdoing possibly even The Last Jedi when it comes to an incompetent Star Wars story. But overall, man, there is absolutely nothing memorable about this story other than just how fucking stupid it is and how horrible the final act of it is with fighting for a robot's freedom. But yeah, that just about does it for the story. I do not want to break this thing down point by point. It's just, it's bad. It's bad, plain and simple. It never gets good. You know, you can kind of see like an inkling of like some sort of potential when it comes to the plot line, but it is quickly tossed out the window, trust me. But yeah, there's just one more topic I kind of want to cover, and that's the graphics and sound, so I don't really think that should take too long, but let's go ahead and move on over to that. So aside from all the visual issues I mentioned previously in the other section towards the beginning of this review, I think the game looks fine. I wouldn't say it looks as good as something like Ubisoft's Avatar game, but I think it looks just about in line with Assassin's Creed Mirage, for example. I mean, it's fine. I don't really think graphics have ever been a problem for Ubisoft, and it definitely doesn't carry them in my mind like it does for so many other people, because that's always the first defense I always hear whenever I criticize a Ubisoft game is, but dude, look how good the graphics are. Like I'm supposed to give a fuck. But yeah, the game looks fine. The performance was fine for the most part on console. I mean, I didn't really get a chance to play it on PC because it crashed on me twice in 3 minutes, so I decided that was a lost cause. But overall, I think the game looks fine. On PS5, I only had a couple of crashes, and again, scattered visual glitches and issues here and there, but nothing severe or game-breaking in that regard. I don't know, man. There's not really too much to say on the graphics. I think the facial models is probably the most jarring part, because Kay goes from looking like, I would say, mid at best to downright ugly depending on the lighting or the perspective or whatever. Like there's something freaky going on with the facial motion capture with her face, and it just looks so uncanny and so different depending on what scene you're looking at. And yeah, I don't know, bro. If you look at the real life face model for Kay and then you look at her character model, you're like, what in the fuck happened, bro? So it's definitely a very interesting case. I definitely think Ubisoft deliberately made her ugly because that falls in line with the ESG sweet baby agenda, so not really too surprising there. But yeah, I think graphically the game's fine. I mean, it definitely could use some improvement, but overall I think it does the job perfectly fine. But as far as sound goes, like I thought the sound effects were all pretty decent. Like they have the standard like Star Wars blaster sounds and everything like that, so that was cool. The voice acting for the most part was fine. I mean, it's just the quirk Chungus writing that's really fucking cringe, but overall I thought those two aspects were okay. The music is what kind of kills it for me. Like they have this Star Wars clone music which is meant to sound similar to like the Star Wars soundtrack, but doesn't really elevate to that level of, you know, the nostalgia and feel that the original Star Wars music brings to mind from John Williams. And it just makes you wonder, like, if you're gonna go as far as licensing the Star Wars IP, why didn't you put the actual Star Wars soundtrack in the game? It would have gone a very long way in just adding to that overall Star Wars feel, because, you know, whether people want to admit it or not, the soundtrack of Star Wars really made that movie as iconic as it is and really sets the mood and the tone for the action that's happening on screen. So I think them not having Star Wars music of any sort from the movies, even in crucial moments, like when you see Darth Vader, Imperial March should be playing. When you enter the cantina music should should be playing. When you go into like this old droid factory that was building battle droids, they should have had the battle droid theme from, you know, Attack of the Clones. Like, there's so many missed opportunities to, like, you know, tickle the member berries basically and bring forth like this feeling of nostalgia of the Star Wars franchise, but they completely opted not to do that. I'm guessing they didn't want to pay for the licensing fees for the music, which again, if you're licensing Star Wars, why the fuck wouldn't you just go all in? But it just leads me to my prior belief that this was that Beyond Good and Evil 2 game that they just reskinned with a Star Wars paint job, is my guess, once they found out that EA had lost exclusivity for the Star Wars IP. That is probably my best guess as to why this game is the way that it is. But I just think the music was a massive missed opportunity. Like, it's not bad, but it's not Star Wars. When you think of Star Wars music, you have a very specific sound in your head, and anytime you hear something different, it just completely disconnects you from that belief. So I think music would have gone a very long way in just overall enhancing this experience that much more. But yeah, I don't really think there's anything inherently bad in either one of these categories, but I figured it'd be worth talking about at least briefly. So let's go ahead and wrap this review up, man, and get to the conclusion, because holy shit, this video is already too damn long. So to wrap this review up, Star Wars Outlaws is not a bad game per se. Mechanically, it's sound for the most part. It runs decently, has minimal game-breaking bugs or anything like that. It definitely has its issues, but it's not an objectively bad game. The problem is it's just more generic Ubisoft that we've seen 100 times before, with a very, very thin coat of Star Wars paint on top of it that just scatters in just enough stormtroopers to remind you that you're actually playing a Star Wars game, because otherwise you really wouldn't even remember that fact, considering how this game plays out. I don't really understand why this game was made. Again, I keep going back to it, but I truly feel like this is what happened to that Beyond Good and Evil 2 game that they announced like about a decade ago, it feels like at this point. And once EA lost exclusivity for the Star Wars license, they decided to take their female lead space action adventure game and basically utilize the Star Wars IP to rebrand it, and that is why we have Star Wars Outlaws. And I don't really think it was that great of a decision, because who the fuck buys a Star Wars game for pseudo Ubisoft stealth? I don't know of anyone that's been asking for a Star Wars stealth game. Give us like this cool action game where you play as like a stormtrooper or a clone, or better yet, a Jedi or a Sith, because, you know, lightsabers are what Star Wars is. Like, there is a reason why lightsabers are like the #1 selling piece of Star Wars merchandise, is because people love that shit. We don't have enough video games of Star Wars anymore. Like, if we had 100 Star Wars games coming out, okay, maybe making a stealth game wouldn't be a bad idea. But with as few Star Wars games as we get, I don't really understand why they went with this direction, and it's not really something that I associate with Star Wars at all. And as a result, it never really felt like I was playing a Star Wars game, other than seeing the stormtroopers and the occasional missions that definitely had that Star Wars aesthetic. It just really feels like this was an attempt for Ubisoft to take their existing formula, existing assets, and put that Star Wars coat of paint on top of it to try and capitalize on some easy nostalgia bucks. And that's exactly what I think happened here, and it just didn't work out. The story is incredibly forgettable, other than just for how bad it is and how terrible the final plot twist and final arc of the story really is. The gameplay is nothing special, with no real sense of progression, and basically feels the exact same from beginning to end. The side activities are your typical Ubisoft filler content with some extra stuff on top that actually felt pretty meaningful. And overall, I just really could not recommend this game, especially at full price. I mean, if you're really into like the modern Ubisoft experience, then maybe I would say wait for a sale. I mean, this game will probably be like $20 within the next 6 months or so, so I highly doubt it's going to stay full price for very long, because I don't think it's selling incredibly well. But even then, I would say hold off and wait, because the game is not in a technically great place right now, and the longer it's out, the better the game is going to get from that perspective. So you might as well hold out and wait, is my personal opinion, but it's up to you at the end of the day. Personally, I would not recommend this game. I think there are plenty of other games that have come out this year that are well worth your time, more so than this. And on top top of that, it's just not a fun experience. I really just did not enjoy this game, and I was ready for it to be over by the time I finished the 16-hour campaign. So overall, if I had to assign a number to Star Wars Outlaws, I'm giving this a 4 out of 10, which translates to below average. I think this is definitely better than Ubisoft's Avatars, Frontiers of Pandora, but not as good as Assassin's Creed Mirage. So I'm going to go with a 4 out of 10 on this one. I do not think that this is a game that is worth your money, especially not the $150 I had to shell out in order to play this game for your entertainment. So with that said, guys, if you could and you made it to the end of this extremely long review, please drop a like on this video. I would greatly appreciate it. And let me know in the comment section your thoughts on Star Wars Outlaws. Are you buying it? Are you skipping it? Have you played it? Did you like it? Did you hate it? I'm really interested to hear your take on this particular game. But with all of that said, man, because this video is more than long enough at this point, I just want to say thank you for all the recent support on the channel. You guys are the absolute fucking best, and I will catch you guys next time. And remember, guys, the Force is female.
Let's get out of here. Glad that's over.